Welcome, champions, to the next overview and tier list ranking, featuring the newest champion, and the newest reworked champion. This is where we'll break down their mechanics and place them in my overall tier list for every champion in the game. But before that, I'm going to remind all of you that I'm streaming on Twitch, have been since the last video, and through that process, we have reassessed the tier list with your input and have finalized the new overall tier list, which we will be using from now on. You will see a lot has changed, and that's just the nature of how the game has evolved. A lot of the S tier champions have taken a hit, either slightly or heavily in some cases. A common theme is seeing debuffers losing their high placements because of the phasing out of their importance, via click damage or just in general. Power comes more heartily from champions raw buffing numbers than they used to. Now, I would like to reiterate, if you are a newer player looking for what champions to unlock first, do not go by this list one by one. Not all champions synergize together. You want to make a game plan for what you're going to want to build in your account. If you want my opinion on that matter, as a newcomer, a generalized recommendation I often make for the current state of the game is to lean into the absolute adversaries. They are a powerful affiliation that synergizes together, and their DPS has the best availability in the game, which is important for a DPS. I'd start early with Lae'zel, as she makes that affiliation's speed mechanic come online. Fill out your roster with their affiliation so you have a baseline speed team to work with that also works with your pushing team. Then you're open to focus on important mechanics like Briv's jumps after that. Then you're pretty wide open. You could focus on the more specific speed teams to iron out an ideal gem farm, or just go wherever you want from there. If you want to know why some of the shifts have happened in the tier list, you can watch the old VODs which I've been uploading to my YouTube, or catch them on my Twitch channel, or even catch me live on Twitch and ask. If you're watching this video right when I released it, I'll be live right now. Or leave a comment below or to the side, however YouTube's doing that now, which I will be replying to after I finish today's stream. At the top, we have the overall best buffer in the game, Valentine, the most important speed mechanic and gem farming in Briv, the best scaling DPS in Artemis, the best available DPS who still has good scaling in the Dark Urge, the DPS of the absolute adversaries, and the flat best single buff in the game provided by Will. The A+ and A- are full of champions with great buffing numbers, and those who excel in their roles with either just large numbers or pre-stack scaling that can see use in multiple formation types. The B+ and B- are still good champions, but those who either just can't quite reach what those in A can put out, or aren't quite as good in their roles as those above them. Still good picks and often have a place in a formation. Or maybe they have a bit of counter synergy or some conflicts or heavy restrictions in how they can be used. The C+ and C- are for those who either can perform well but in niche scenarios, or have really restrictive formation abilities that can only come online in rare cases. But there is still some decent champions here that will still see use. The D is reserved for those who really just don't put up good numbers, and in general won't see use other than restricted runs or very rare cases, such as Minsk with his Ceremorphosis, Donner with his minor gold debuff, or if you need his race. Or Paulton's gold find Windjar Laxel is restricted. And of course the F tier, champions I would never recommend for any formation. But also remember, at the end of the day, I still stand by, use who you want to use. This is meant as a means for both fun and a general idea of power within the game. If you want to make Binwin the last champion in this tier list your main DPS just because, you do you. I just wouldn't objectively ever recommend it based on the game's current state and mechanics. Anyway, back to the main event. It's time to talk about Duke Ravengard, the lawful neutral human fighter in Seat 8. While he is unaffiliated, he does have ways to synergize with the absolute adversaries, being Will's father after all. But we'll get to that soon enough. His main attack will simply melee the closest enemy with one hit, and his ultimate will have his magical armor ignite in flames, creating an aura for 20 seconds. which will make his attacks deal an additional 25 seconds of bud damage, and any enemy that makes a melee attack against the formation will suffer the same. Ravengard has a higher base critical hit chance at 20%, and this is actually important for his kit, so keep that in mind. His main source of damage buffing is from Marshal of the Flaming Fist, where he gains a command stack for each champion in the formation that has a melee base attack, including himself. So while he is slotted a minimum of 1 and maximum of 10, depending on your formation, each stack increases the damage of melee champions for each multiplicatively. And yes, the equipment tied to this is pre-stack scaling. With critical teamwork, when a champion with a melee base attack gets a critical hit, he will increase the effect of Marshal of the Flaming Fist, as well as increase the chance of all champions getting a critical hit by 1%. These will both additively stack up to 50, so other champions landing critical hits will be important. So for example, if we're using him with the absolute adversaries, Lae'zel's specialization to increase her critical hit chance actually becomes a potential support option, as well as her critical feat. Since the more she is getting critical hits, she is now actually increasing the Dark Urge's damage through Ravengard. And he still has Position of Power, which increases the effect of outgoing positional formation abilities of champions with a melee base attack by 25% for each command stack he has, stacking additively. As he is in Seat 8, this is a bit of a way for him to compete with the likes of Narak, but there is no gear slot tied to this ability to scale it. His specialization choice is quite unique, but if you're running with his son, there's likely one pick you're going to lock in. First, he has Lead the Charge, where when he gets a critical hit, he'll follow up by bashing the enemy with his shield, knocking the enemy back a short distance, and when this occurs, all melee champions adjacent to Ravengard have their base attack cooldowns reset. Strength of Baldur's Gate will cause champions with a melee base attack to have their crit hit chance increased by 20% additively, and their crit damage by 1000%. This is a great way to keep his critical teamwork flowing. Lastly, he has Legacy of Ravengard, where if Will is in the formation, anyone affected by Will's folk hero benefit gains an additional stack, but the maximum remains 4 stacks. That means pairing Ravengard with Will potentially unlocks 4 out of 4 folk hero stacks where you otherwise wouldn't be able to get it, and yes, that means you can with the Dark Urge, but it's a bit counter synergy, but we'll get to that in a minute. His equipment is pretty standard, 2 for all damage, 1 for Marshal of the Flaming Fist, but keep in mind the pre-stack with this one. 1 for critical teamwork, then 1 for ultimate attack, damage, and ultimate cooldown. His feats are fairly standard as well, but there are a few to keep in mind. First, he has a Ceramorphosis feat, and is the other way he synergizes with the absolute adversaries. Also, while you can't scale Position of Power with gear, there are feats to increase it. But also remember, Marshal of the Flaming Fist is pre-stack, so these will be important too. His achievement isn't too bad, simply requiring you to attain 10,000 critical hits while he is in the formation, so you could just make a crit-heavy team. You will see a common theme in all of Ravengard's adventure variants, and that is that for all of them, he will start in the formation, be able to be moved and not removed, but also melee champions are the only ones that can be used in all of them. Overall, there are a lot of options, but it can be a bit restrictive. Hopefully you don't rely on a magic-only pushing team. Also remember, the search feature is up and running, so if you want to plan who to use in a run, you can filter it by melee to see who will be available yourself, or even start the run and check the current adventure box to see who from your roster is currently usable. The first of his variants will restrict you to a full team of melee, like all of them, to symbolize his Marshal of the Flaming Fist, but that's actually the only restriction here. The second variant will also restrict your damage to 1 at the start of each area until someone in the formation scores a critical hit. Every 200 areas, the number of critical hits required to remove this damage reduction debuff is increased by 1. So slot as many critical strike users as you can, and maybe even slot their critical feats. Lae'zel, again, is a great candidate, as a critical melee with a specialization to increase that chance, while also having an increase with her feats. You'll also likely want to take Ravengard's critical specialization for this one. Other champions of note are Puent in Seat 5, who can additively increase crit chance with a debuff that can get all the way up to a 40% additive increase, and Wolfgar in Seat 10, who has an additive 10% with his specializations. The third will start him with his ultimate unlocked, and will have the cooldown reduced by 75%. This matters because the first wave of each non-boss area, there will be a 20% chance that 30 goblins immediately spawn, who do not drop gold or count toward progression. The bud damage he offers in retaliation to your formation coming under attack while his ultimate is up will help mitigate this. Ultimately, as long as you have a decent formation of melee-only champions, these variants shouldn't pose too much of a problem. But if you're magic focused, you might have a struggle here. Now, what about his availability? He is naturally available for all Day 1 Trials restrictions, and only 3 out of the 5 patrons. He is neutral, so not available for Mert. However, he does have an intelligence feat to become available for Strahd. So overall, pretty good. Only locked out of Mert as long as you get that feat for Strahd. But let's touch on his synergy with the absolute adversaries. Ultimately, the problem here is that most people are running with Nrak in this seat, who also has a Ceramorphosis feat, and is a great buffer. Also, his race and class don't conflict with Will's folk hero. Well, one more human into that mix throws everything off for the Dark Urge, by using Ravengard. Now, to mitigate this, you could replace Gale with Orkira. This will take out one of the humans and give you another Dragonborn to work with, and grant the Dark Urge 4 out of 4 folk hero stacks. But that doesn't exactly feel good taking out Gale from the absolute adversaries. It would be more ideal if they would just give the Dark Urge a human feat. Now those who use Mehen will have to switch to Egbert, because you can't use the fighter Mehen and the fighter Ravengard anymore. That's too many fighters for folk hero, because we'll also be using Lae'zel, 3 fighters is too many. You will need the Paladin / Dragonborn tag from Egbert. So if you're looking for the current ideal 4 out of 4 folk hero Dark Urge synergy, this is probably going to be your team. Orkira and Egbert as non-absolute adversaries, offering you the Dragonborn tags without class conflicts, Valentine to give you that extra sorcerer tag, and the rest of the available absolute adversaries paired with Ravengard. And there is an argument to be made about what's better, Ceramorphosis stacks versus folk hero. At the end of the day, with investment, folk hero is the best buff in the game, so 4 out of 4, if you can attain it, is pretty good. But there's always the option of using Ravengard and keeping it 3 out of 4, keeping Gale in the team, and then you could even throw in Dynahair instead of Egbert for another Ceramorphosis stack, since you're not relying on race anymore. So it's a little up in the air. What do you want? 4 out of 4 folk hero with 7 out of 10 Ceramorphosis, or 3 out of 4 folk hero and 9 out of 10 Ceramorphosis. Ultimately, that's your call to make, but folk hero is the better buff. But that anti-synergy is pretty annoying. If you choose to lean into the Ceramorphosis with so many humans, if they ever do give the Dark Urge a human glitch feat, he'll be prepped and ready for that 4 out of 4 folk hero. Please, codename, if any of you can hear me, please, give Dirge a human glitch feat. And for that matter, give Valentine a Ceramorphosis feat that turns her evil as well. Give us a legit 10 out of 10 Ceramorphosis 4 out of 4 folk hero team. It's right there and in reach. Please. And give Shadowheart a good feat and skin that gives her that white hair too. I'm on my knees over here, bro. Come on. Anyway, at the end of the day, Duke Ravengard is a pretty solid champion with good availability. A bit restrictive in needing as many melee as possible to truly shine, but there are plenty of melee DPS that can benefit, and gain that critical synergy as well outside of the absolute adversaries. Hard to be perfect, but good. Pre-stack scaling, but a bit restrictive, though good availability. A solid A- champion. And now it's time to talk about the reworked champion, Ezmerelda in Seat 1. If you haven't noticed yet, there is a new role added to the game to some champions, and that is the debuff role. And that is because of this champion right here, and potentially other reasons in the future. Ez is a strange combo of being wildly different, but still kind of working the same. Kinda. It's better if I just go over how everything works now instead of mentioning changes, because, well, technically everything changed. She gains that debuff role with Training Montage, where she marks enemies that she attacks, training other champions to spot their vulnerable points. This causes marked enemies to take more damage for each champion slotted with the debuff role, stacking multiplicatively and scaling with the pre-stack. She further boosts the effectiveness of this debuff with Preparation, where every time a debuff is applied to an enemy, it is increased by 20%, stacking multiplicatively up to 100 times, and resetting when changing areas. Since you're going to want debuffers slotted anyway to scale up Training Montage, this will likely be maintaining stacks quite well. But she's not done. She also has Threat Tracking, which makes undead her favored foes, and makes her track the favored foes any champion kills while she's in the formation, increasing the base effect of Training Montage by a very small amount for each favored foe killed, stacking additively and then applying multiplicatively. These stacks will persist throughout that adventure, resetting when you complete it, and capping at 100,000 or 1e5. As this affects the pre-stack nature of Training Montage, this is a good way to scale it, but there is not a gear slot tied to it. But she wouldn't be a proper favored foe champion without a way to force spawn them, right? She also gains enemies in the mist, where as long as she's in the formation, there is a chance a mist enemy will spawn with each wave. When a mist enemy is defeated, an enemy whose type matches one of her favored foes will appear from the mist, and all nearby enemies gain her Training Montage debuff. So it's also a way for her to spread that main source of damage buffing. Note that you can add more favored foes with her feats. Her specialization choice is now only one choice instead of two, and is quite different. With We've Trained for This, all champions deal more damage against enemies with armored-based health, increasing their chance of breaking an armored piece. Additionally, if a hit or armored-based enemy is affected by Training Montage, successful hits against them will remove an additional hit or armor chunk. So she maintains her armor-breaking identity through this specialization pick. With Vampire Hunter, the effect of Training Montage is increased on enemies who are one of her favored foes, and Threat Tracking will count each favored foe kill twice, an effective way to scale her damage buffing potential. And with The Devil You Know, she will increase the effect of Training Montage by a flat amount, which will be doubled during Strahd Patron variants. Note that she does now have an equipment slot to scale her specialization picks. The biggest problem that comes from Ezmerelda in her current state is who does she work with? Kind of no one. Sure, she can pump good numbers, no doubt, and has amazing availability, but requires a specific team of debuffers to shine. She doesn't have the strength and isn't evil for Krond, no positionals for Artemis or Warduke, and then Black Viper as well, regardless of class, is human which conflicts with an ideal Ashara, and the list goes on. There is also the problem that there exists many debuffers in the game that don't receive the debuff role tag that she requires to scale up. Someone like Grama, who has a specialization choice to become a debuffer, never gets that role regardless of choice. I find that a bit strange, as those who do not have a magical-based attack but have a specialization choice to become a magical attacker, like Lae'zel or the Dark Urge or Krond, will then interact with magical mechanics if you take it. Why wouldn't this be the case for debuffers? You might say it's because there is no role-changing mechanics in the game, but that's not true either. Dynahair can alter Minsk's role, making him a tank where he isn't normally through her specialization picks. Not only that, but Ezmerelda's seat is by far the most populated seat of debuffers, who she can't then synergize with. While I like the direction they took with this whole debuff thing, and Ezmerelda's kit is fun, ultimately she just doesn't have much of a place in your formation unless you're hit with some kind of restrictions. Maybe if one day, say she gets a +2 strength feat, she can then have 16 strength for Krond, and she'll at least have a place there. As in that scenario, you could technically make a 10 out of 10 debuffer, 10 out of 10 survival of the fittest team, but I don't foresee that happening, and until that day, I just don't see anyone choosing to invest in a debuff team. There is currently potential synergy with Lucius, as he is a debuffer who also has armor-breaking mechanics, and shares an affiliation with two other debuffers in Nova and Ayla. but he has a Modron core that requires all of his affiliation to pop off, and both Sentry and Quillic are not debuffers, the remaining of the affiliation. If your main DPS is Warden, Strix, Torogar, or Yorvin, you could make something happen, but more often than not, that probably won't be the case. There is always the future, potentially the Saturday morning squad or something else. We might see some fun with her eventually, but we can only rank her based on today. She is better than she was, a lot, and overall I think it's a positive step. Now she's definitely going to climb, and there might be some argument to be had over on my Twitch for this placement, but keep in mind she is pre-stack and gets to some great numbers, and has some amazing availability. Even if you can't slot a full debuff team, she might still be somewhat useful in some scenarios. And while click debuff doesn't have the importance it used to, she is going to be better than Orkira in that seat for a click debuff team. And you just can't deny those kind of numbers. She's not going to climb with some of the other pre-stackers, but we are going to sneak her into the B+. Her potential is there and her numbers are good, but she's struggling to find a place in the world, other than armor breaking. Now let's take a look at the champions of this event, Dragondown. On top of Ravengard and Ezmerelda, for flex options we have Korth, Dungeon Master, Merylwyn, Shaka, BBEG, Nova, Binwyn, and Celise. A lot of interesting options here. Dungeon Master and BBEG are absolutely worth an unlock if you don't have them yet. Their utility can come online without item level investment, with BBEG's speed and Dungeon Master's ability to pull in a restricted champion. Merylwyn is the best gold find in her seat, and her event buff will increase this even further if you already have her unlocked, so that's something to keep in mind. Korth is a decent buffer, but has the ability to alter dexterity of other champions, which can be handy for Modron core dexterity checks, or working with other formation abilities. Celise is just an okay buffer, but has good armor-breaking utility. Nova is an excellent positional buffing tank, and Shaka is a great buffer, but many players find his RNG frustrating to utilize. And then there's Binwyn, the champion I would not recommend ever wasting a flex slot on. A DPS that does not perform well, and you might even consider not unlocking him, as he takes a sit in seat 3. And some people prefer to leave that open if they focus Artemis as their DPS. So Dungeon Master has a higher chance of pulling Artemis in that seat. And you're probably better off just getting the event buffs on another champion anyway. Only if you're desperate for unlocking him just as a champion in your roster should you ever consider Binwyn. Thanks for dropping in. Slap that like, sub, and bell. Check the description to follow me on Twitter and Twitch, and check me out there. I may be live right now, either talking about idle champions or going through my Final Fantasy 1 playthrough. At any rate, the most important thing, as always, is have a hell of a time out there, champion.